Is this on?
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Aquashella. You guys having fun? That's cool. Awesome. Glad you're here. Thank you for being here today. I am Jason Adams from KG Tropicals. Oh, wait, no. I am John from Primetime Aquatics. No, who am I? Oh, that's right. I'm Jason Adams from Primetime Aquatics. We get it right eventually. So I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me in the last couple days and be like, check out your new cool YouTube channel. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I'm just switching. So you're the first ones to know. Not true. So today I'm going to be talking about fish from Lake Tanganyika. Anybody ever kept them? Anybody keep lake? Oh, so some of you have. They are an amazing fish. Got some pictures here. I'm going to show you all kinds of little video clips and cool pictures, because if you haven't kept them, they are pretty awesome, and I'm going to talk about why that is. So before we get into all the things, some of the footage is not mine, so the underwater footage from Lake Tanganyika itself, that is not mine, but a lot of the stuff from the tanks, that either came from me or somebody else named Jason that's in our Greater Chicago Cichlid Association Club. And then we've got some stuff from Big Rich, Ohio Fish Rescue, because he's got an amazing Frontosa tank that is absolutely huge. It's really cool. So for those of you who don't know, Lake Tanganyika, it is one of the three major lakes in Africa, one of the rift lakes. And so as you look at the picture, you can see at the very, very top, there's kind of a round-looking lake. That is Lake Victoria. Anybody familiar with Lake Victoria cichlids? They're really awesome. If you've never seen them, imagine you take a fish and you just take a whole box of Skittles and you just chuck it right at the fish and it all sticks and all the colors go everywhere. That's most of your Lake Victoria cichlids. They kind of behave like Mbuna from Lake Malawi. They're somewhat aggressive. Females don't get as much color, but they're really cool. So that's the top lake. At the very bottom, yes, I skipped Lake Tanganyika. At the very bottom, that's Lake Malawi. Those are probably the most popular fish that come from Lake Malawi. That's your Mbuna. Those are your peacock cichlids. And when you go to the store, that's usually when you're talking about African cichlids, that's kind of what people just default to when they're thinking about African cichlids. Our focus today is on that little skinny lake right in the center, Lake Tanganyika. It is an absolutely fascinating lake because it's very, very narrow. It doesn't have a lot of surface area yet. It's an extremely deep lake, which causes some interesting issues when it comes to the water parameters. This is a video of Lake Tanganyika. It's mostly rocks, so there's not a whole lot of or aquatic plants or anything like that, although these fish tend to leave aquatic plants alone, something I'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, it's mostly rocks. As you get closer to the shore, there's a lot of shells, and so then our shell dwellers, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, they hang out there. They've got some really pretty feather fins, which you're looking at here. These are Neolamprologus burchardi, I think, because I can't really see the screen all that well. And then we've got some what are known as feather fin cichlids. Usually when you find them in the pet store, they're extremely expensive, but also insanely cool when it comes to their coloration. And then that one with the yellow tail, that's a Cyprichromis. So it's an open water fish. So, what happened? Okay, there we go. So, the Lake Tanganyika, as I mentioned, in terms of volume, it's a rather large lake. And I really put this slide here so we could compare Lake Tanganyika in the center and Lake Superior on the right-hand side. So you can see Lake Superior, a lot of us are familiar with the Great Lakes around us. Lake Superior has got a decent amount of volume, and it's a very wide lake. Where Lake Tanganyika, it's actually got more volume, but it's very, very skinny. And as you get further down in that water column, it's really hard for living things to live down there, especially fish. This slide here kind of shows you the depth of Lake Tanganyika. I know it's hard to read a little bit, and the stuff is way too small, but trust me, it's a long lake, it's a skinny lake, it's a very deep lake. And because of that, the water parameters are pretty interesting. So check this out. If you live around here, it's actually fairly easy to keep Lake Tanganyikan cichlids because our water parameters are mostly conducive to their growth. But you can see pH is around low 8s all the way up to 9. And actually the pH goes down the deeper in the lake you go. And so there's actually some variation there. A lot of people think, oh, African cichlids, they need this pH of 8.5, but there's a significant variance when it comes to Lake Tanganyika. The other thing that's kind of interesting are the temperatures. Check that out. Again, a lot of times we look at these lakes, especially you think in the middle of Africa, there's not a whole lot of change when it comes to their temperature of the air. But when you get to Lake Tanganyika and you look at the temperature of the water, 73 down really deep. Again, that lake is so deep that there's just not a whole lot of energy going down there. There's no sunlight down there, and the temperature is actually quite warm at the top, closer to 84. So this kind of informs us when we're thinking about keeping these fish, what our pHs should be like. Ideally, again, we want to be, usually upper 7s, close to 8 is more than sufficient to get them to breed. It's more than sufficient to keep them happy and healthy. Water hardness, very hard, especially on the KH. Right? You can easily be up in the mid-teens, upper teens. And so again, for us in the Chicagoland area, that's really good because a lot of times, especially if you're on a well and you've got a lot of carbonate hardness and you're pushing like, oh my gosh, yeah, I've got 300 ppm. Good, congratulations. These are an option for you. One of the interesting things, I don't think we talk about it enough, and at some point I'm going to do a video about it. Dissolved oxygen. It's not something we tend to think about. We don't usually measure it in an aquarium, partially because it's really expensive to do so, to get the equipment to measure dissolved oxygen. But when it comes to Lake Tanganyika, even though the volume is very great, because it's so deep, most of the fish are at the top levels of that lake, or they're around the shoreline, because as you go further down, the dissolved oxygen is not sufficient to support aquatic life. Now, there will be tons of microbes down there, something I'm really fascinated about. So you've got the archaeobacteria, and they usually don't need any oxygen. Pretty extreme environments, very high pressures. And so as you get a lot lower in that lake, a lot deeper, the fish just aren't there. Now, the fish themselves, the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm going to tell you right now, when it comes to the types of fish, I made this up. It is not a scientific classification whatsoever. And some of the fish I'm going to talk about, sometimes they go between a couple of these different groups. But at least for people who are interested in keeping the fish, this can be a useful way to think about them if you wanted to set up a fish tank for Lake Tanganyikan fish. And so we've got our shell dwellers. I'll show you all kinds of pictures. We've got our rock dwellers, our open water inhabitants, and then we've got some of the predators, both our smaller predators, usually around 3, 4, maybe no larger than 6 inches, and then we've got some of the large predators, which pretty much don't mix well with the other fish. Just because they are big enough and they've got a really large mouth, they eat most of these other fish. So shell dwellers. This, what you're looking at here, this is a video of my 50-gallon lowboy. If you've watched the channel at all, you know that 50-gallon lowboy is in the background of a lot of the videos. I've had that tank up and running for many years, and it started out as a shell dweller tank, and it continues to be one. And so that 50-gallon lowboy, at any given time, might have 200 or 300 multis, otherwise known as Neolampologus multifasciatus. That's the one at the top. I'll show you some pictures of the other ones, don't worry. But there's really, these are probably, the 6 that I've mentioned here are some of the more common ones. So if you're interested in setting up a tank for shell dwellers, the multis are by far the most common. The similis look a lot like multis. They have a little bit different striping pattern. They can be a little bit darker. The other ones, they get a little bit more aggressive, but they all stay small. And that's one of the cool things about them. And so when you're looking at the shell dwellers, some of the advantages that you could have, why would you want to keep them? First thing is, how many of you think that cichlids just have some kind of special personality? Anybody here just like, yeah, there's nothing, I love neons. My wife's favorite fish is the green neon. And those fish are great, but when you come up to the tank, they're not like, hey man, what's up? What you doing? You gonna feed me? What's up, man? Hey, how's it going? How was your day? They don't do that. These fish, they do. They actually ask me, how's it going? And I'm like, you should not be talking. This is awfully weird. So no, they don't actually talk, just to be clear. But they do look like they're always thinking. They're always interacting with one another. They interact with their owner, and they're doing so in a very small package. And so what you're looking at here, this is Neolampologus similis. So it's kind of like the multi. If you were choosing between the two, the previous slide where I showed you the multis and this one where you've got the similis here, I like to keep the similis on a darker substrate. I just think they look so cool. They almost have like a reverse pattern of the multis. Now the multis I like to keep on a lighter substrate, and it kind of changes their look a little bit. And so they do look a little bit different, but they behave pretty much the same. The cool thing, if you've never kept them, and you're like, man, I don't have a big tank for cichlids. I don't have the room. You don't need a lot of room. A 20-gallon long will be perfect for these fish. That's what you're looking at here. This tank here with the similis, it's a 20-gallon long, and at any given time there might be 30 or 40 fish in there. Little babies. I mean, some of them are really tiny little guys. And it's the other cool thing about the shell dwellers is when they actually breed, I don't care how long you've been in fish keeping, isn't fish when they breed still exciting? It could be a guppy, it could be a platy, little shrimplets, right? Oh my gosh, they're so cute. Just get a little squeeze on the cheek. So it's just so exciting. And these are no different, except they're even cuter. And the reason why is the little tiny babies. They're just almost hard to see. They start peeking their heads out of the shell. They get a little bit of courage, and they're like, hey man, I've been in this structure my whole life. What's out there? And the parents will get them back in, like, hey, don't come out here. You're still too small. And then over time, they get more and more confident, and they get further and further away from their shells until they find their own new home and new shells. So 20-gallon long, even a standard 20-gallon is perfectly fine. A lot of people ask, hey, can I keep these in a 10-gallon? Size-wise, yeah, I mean, you're looking at fish that stay small. They're only going to get to be about, the males, maybe 1.25 inches or so. So some of the other shell dwellers get a little bit larger. Could you do it in a 10-gallon? Could you keep a male with a couple females? Maybe. But sometimes if you've got multiple males in a 10-gallon, that can be a little bit rough. Sometimes if you've got multiple females and the male's trying to breed with multiples, then that can be a little bit rough. So I do like to keep them in at least a 20-gallon. Plus, once they start breeding, they're going to fill your tank. Give them time. Right? Usually if you buy them small at a pet store at less than 1 inch, it might take them 4 to 6 months, maybe a little longer to get them to breed. But once they do, they will fill a tank, and it's actually pretty cool. And I think that's one of the other cool things about these fish is they do breed you understand? Do you get that? Relatively easily. So and the aggression is not terrible for the shell dwellers. The Similis, the Maltese, they can cohabitate and get along for the most part. I mean, every once in a while there'll be some issues, especially if you're keeping them in a smaller tank. But for the most part, they get along okay. The Maltese and the Similis do. Now, some things to think about if you are considering shell dwellers, some things that maybe, and these, by the way, these are gold ocellatus. This was in a grow-out/quarantine tank, so that's why there's gravel there. You would always want to try to keep your shell dwellers on sand. They shift the sand around, they bury their shells, so that's why this was on gravel. That was not a long-term solution. But these are the gold ocellatus. These are different. These guys can be a little bit more aggressive than the other fish I've talked about so far. They've got amazing color, a lot more color than the Maltese and the Similis, but these you definitely want a 20-gallon, usually just a pair.
All right, folks, at 1 o'clock coming up on the main stage, Sanjay Joshi, Greek speaker. You have been given a talk, definitely a big draw when he speaks, so if you want to see that 1 o'clock on the main stage, 1:30 is the freshwater skate off on the contest stage. All kinds of things going on. Be sure to get your raffle tickets and your official Aquashella swag, and enjoy your day.
Enjoy your day. Don't forget your Aquashella swag. Sanjay, I got news for you, man. It's going to be like 1:30. Joke's on you, dude. So, again, why not, things to think about with the shell dwellers. They will mess up your tank in the sense that if you're somebody who likes a nice aquascape tank and you put the sand exactly how you like it, the shells are absolutely symmetrical, just how you like it, they're not going to leave it that way. I think it's actually a benefit is to watch their community dynamics and watch them move shells. These guys here, the ocellatus, they're just mean. They're mean-spirited. The males will actually bury the shells of other males. So you got a male over there who's been working all day like, hey man, just got a home. Another one will be like, go over there, look over there. Oh, watch this. And they're like, you're not having any babies because I just buried everything. So if you also like to keep larger fish, sometimes, these guys, again, 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, they're not necessarily conducive to keeping them with, like, let's say, Malawi cichlids. Like, people ask all the time, hey, can I keep them with Mbuna? It's not ideal. Can I keep them with peacocks? No, because the peacocks will try to eat them. And as assertive as these fish are, sometimes they just can't fight a big, giant mouth. So it can be a little bit of a tough sell for that. These are Meleagris. That's also a shell dweller on the right-hand side. That's a Calvus on the left. We'll talk more about that. This is a female that is actually protecting fry or eggs, so she's not dead. Don't worry, perfectly healthy. And this was as you can see, a heavily planted 125. So the cool thing about the shell dwellers, they do dig through the sand, but if you wanted to put a nubius and glue it to wood or rocks, no, it's not a biotope, so don't, he's like, oh man, he's keeping them all wrong. Look what he did. There's no plants in that lake. Nope, there's not. I don't care, because I like the way it looked. So that's a bunch of jungle val. And so that's the Meleagris. Really cool fish. These guys are probably some of the more aggressive shell dwellers I've kept. Very rewarding, but they are also, they're like the ocellatus, only they actually put the ocellatus in their place in this tank, so I was kind of surprised to see that. They're very rare. If you can find it, I promise you it will be worth your time. This is known as Neolampologus calypterus. The male has got the blue lips and the kind of the yellow face, and at least in terms of the animal world, the males and females have one of the largest differences in size, it's called sexual dimorphism, of any animal out there on the face of the earth. So the females are much, much smaller than the males, usually maybe a third the size. And the reason why they're shell dwellers is they will breed in shells. Now, the male can't go in the shell like the other ones we've talked about so far. The female can. These guys are really silly. So you see all those shells down there by him? That one dude, and there were other males in that tank, usually the dominant male will take all the shells, every last one of them. That was a 33 long, so that's a 4-foot tank, and he took all the shells in that 4-foot tank, moved them all the way to the left, and there were a couple other males in there like, dude, you can't just leave me one shell? One. I just wanted one. It's just someplace to go with my lady. And then he doesn't stop there. He's like, now that I've got all the shells, I'm taking all the ladies too. So he will breed with multiple lady friends, and you take all the shells. So it's probably best, if you're going to keep this particular fish, keep them in with a male, maybe 3, 4, 5 females, and that's probably the best way to go. That's a Parasiprochromis there on the bottom right-hand side. Those fish, anybody ever kept those? They're extremely expensive. And usually when you see them on the internet, they're almost like fluorescent blue stripes. And usually what happens is people take a picture of those fish in just the right light, and then they do this thing on their phone or camera. It's called saturation, and they go, and then you get them, when you actually get them, you're like, these are kind of brown with a little bit of blue. They don't look anything like the pictures. So sometimes people are a little bit disappointed by those ones, but those are not shell dwellers. Now, the rock dwellers. Maybe shell dwellers aren't your thing. Maybe you have a shell phobia. You know, you're just one of those people where you're like, oh man, I can't handle shells. I can't touch them. I can't even look at them. But you just happen to love rocks. So that's Julidochromis ornatus. It's probably my favorite rock dweller on the face of this earth. Rock dwellers get a little bigger than shell dwellers, but not much. Usually the male, or the females actually in most cases are larger, usually around 3.5 inches or so. And there's a couple different types. Again, these lists are not anywhere close to being exhaustive. Otherwise, I'd be up here all day and you'd be like, yeah, remember when we were a half hour behind? Now we're 6 hours behind. I think the thing is closed. So this one here, this is, like I said, it's ornatus, transcriptus. They all have a very similar body shape. Because they inhabit the rocky areas, they're elongated. They're pretty narrow-looking fish, very cool. The cool thing about the rock dwellers is, compared to the shell dwellers, a lot of them either have really cool patterning or they have just awesome colors like this. So if you're thinking about setting up a Lake Tanganyika tank and maybe you want to do something larger like a 4-foot tank, you're like, yeah, I like the shell dwellers, they're interesting, but it would be nice if I had something with a little bit more color. These are the types of fish that you might want to be looking at. So Lelupi, I'll show you those in a minute. They get a really pretty orange color. The Caudopunctatus, I put an asterisk next to these last two because, well, I keep them in the rock-dwelling family in my little special classification system here, but my Caudopunctatus, whenever they have babies, they stick them in I threw shells in there, and they usually put them back they put them in shells, which is pretty crazy. And then the Tropheus, they're just different. They have a very different personality from the rest, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So why do you do the rock dwellers besides the shell phobia? One, they still stay small. So you're still looking at, for a lot of these fish, you could do a 20-gallon long. This was a 33. We've got a couple different fish. The orange, so that's transcriptus right there. So the transcriptus have like a checkerboard pattern. The long orange ones that you see, that's Neolampologus lelupi, and they come in a couple different varieties. Some of them are yellow, and then some of them are orange. A lot of people like the yellow ones. I prefer the orange ones, but you can like whatever ones you want. So yeah, they get a lot of color. Now, unlike the shell dwellers, the other advantage here, they're not going to rearrange your tank. Like a lot of cichlids are diggers. They like to dig up the gravel, the substrate, rip up plants. You can see, again, this is a 33. There's plants everywhere. They don't touch them. They might dig a little bit right next to a rock just to kind of dig a pit under, but for the most part, they leave plants alone. They don't eat them. Right? So all the fish we've talked about so far, I've never seen them eat plants, ever. Now, aggression-wise, for the most part, they're fairly easy to manage for a cichlid. I would say they're comparable in many cases to shell dwellers, where they will tolerate one another fairly well. Again, 33 long, nobody's up there in a corner getting beat on, no fin nipping or anything like that. So it's actually pretty cool. The rocks that you see, here's a pro tip. It's got nothing to do with with fish directly, that's flagstone. We get that stuff at like a landscaping place. It's like, well, at least it was, like 19 cents a pound. So for those of you who are like, oh, that's kind of cool, it can alter water parameters if your water's on the softer side, maybe you've got a lower pH, but for us in the Chicagoland area, that stuff does nothing to our water parameters, and it's really, really cheap. So it is a little bit on the heavy side, so keep that in mind if you're stacking it, but it's for 19 or 29 cents a pound, it's good stuff. So why not the shell or the rock dwellers? Well, there's a couple reasons why you'd want to, you have to think about it a little bit. You are going to need at least a 20-gallon long. All right, these are definitely not fish you'd want to put in a 10-gallon. I know some people will take a pair, breed them in a 10, and then remove the parents as soon as the fry are viable. That's fine if that's your plan, but at least long-term, a 10-gallon is not appropriate. At least 20-gallon. These things do really well in like a 40 breeder or a 4-foot tank. It's actually really cool. If you don't set the tank up properly and there's not enough rocks, sometimes they'll get a little bit hard on one another. They'll start chasing each other around. You'll have a couple dominant fish that take the rocks, as you see here, like some of them are right in the center. And if you don't have more rock work, sometimes they'll spar a little bit for some territory, but it's not bad. It's not like the Mbuna. It's not like the peacock cichlids. These guys are pretty easy to handle. Also breeding. They're very easy to breed. I have never seen them breed. Never, not once. I've never seen them be like, hey man, let's go have babies. Like, if you've ever kept Mbuna, they're doing a little spinning thing at the bottom. Like, everybody in the tank, everybody in your neighborhood knows those fish are breeding. Like, yep, we're laying eggs, we're moving sand everywhere, we're spinning around in a circle. These guys are very secretive. They are. And they will go back and they will lay their eggs in the rocks, and then you won't even know it. So, fun story, the Transcriptus, the checkerboard looking one, I brought a bunch in for a swap. There was like 30 or 40 of them in a standard 20. By the way, they all got along fine for 4 weeks. Pulled them all out, put some clown loaches in there that I had picked up, and all of a sudden I'm looking, I'm like, what the heck is all that in the tank? There was like 40 babies in there. They were really tiny little guys, just picking off the algae. I didn't even know they were there. I don't know what they were living on. It's probably just the algae and the microorganisms, because I didn't think there were any fish in there, but yet they were there. So they're pretty easy to breed, which again, that's kind of exciting if you're into that sort of thing. These are Neolamprologus caudopunctatus, another rock dweller type. This is actually just a standard 20-gallon. I started with 6. 2 pairs decided to pair up in that tank. These are the yellowfin varieties. They look a lot like the shell dwellers in terms of they get a little bit larger, but in terms of their behavior, they do breed in the rocks. But like I said, I have some shells in that tank, and it's very common for them to take the fry, especially when they're pretty young, and kind of shoo them off into the shells every once in a while. But you go on the internet, and a lot of times they'll tell you, hey, you know what? If you try to breed these, you can't have more than a pair in the tank, otherwise the fish are going to eat the babies. Yeah, that didn't happen. And I've done that a number of times. So I've had actually a couple standard 20 gallons where they just absolutely filled the tank, and they never really preyed on each other's fry. What's really cool about these fish, you'll kind of see it in some of the video here, they will get extremely pronounced vertical bars when they are breeding or when they're protecting eggs or little fry that you can't see yet. Usually if you're breeding these fish and you start seeing a lot of those vertical, like black vertical bars, that tells you that they've bred or they're getting ready to. So it's just kind of a way to tell people, get away from me, I don't like you. The last one for the rock dwellers are the Tropheus. I thought this was a cool map. There are lots of different types of Tropheus. Now, these fish are different. They tend to be, of all the fish I've talked about, I think, probably the most aggressive. They usually like to be kept in really big groups. Usually, you're looking at probably a 75 or a 90-gallon, I think, to keep them in all their glory with all the cool colors that they have. They primarily eat vegetable matter. So if you start loading them up full of bloodworms and meaty foods, sometimes they'll bloat. If you do it slowly over long periods of time, not as much. But these are definitely fish that are like, oh, hey, kelp wafers and that kind of thing. They do really good with that, like the rapashi that's got the vegetable matter in it. But they're pretty cool fish. There's so many different varieties. Here they are in the actual lake, Lake Tanganyika. Again, rock dwellers. You can see here, again, like I said, they are usually some of the more aggressive Lake Tanganyikans, at least of the ones I've talked about so far. Get a big group. You can see them just kind of rasping for algae, and that's pretty much what they do. This is not a beginner fish, so if you're interested in Lake Tanganyikan fish, everything I've mentioned so far is manageable. These fish, I would wait. I would wait until you've got some experience and a large tank, and then it would probably make your life a little bit easier. Now, the open water swimmers, this group, oh, they are by far the most colorful. They are also, these are Cyprichromis leptosoma. This is a 40-gallon breeder that I have. Yep, the open water fish, just like everything I've talked about so far, perfectly fine with a planted tank. By the way, the Tropheus maybe not so much, but these guys are absolutely beautiful. The males are the ones with the blue and the yellow tail. The females stay kind of silvery, but these guys are insanely cool. The females, they are mouth-brooding cichlids just like the imbuna are and the peacocks, so they'll hold the fry in their mouth. But what's interesting about these fish is the fry, they let them grow really large, like easily. I mean, you can, when they spit the fry out, they're very easy to see. They look like little miniatures of the fish that you're seeing here, but they'll only usually hold like 3 to 5. And they'll spit those out and you'll be like, huh, they're just swimming around. They're so cute because they are, like I said, they're just miniatures of these guys, and they have so much color. So the Cyprichromis are cool. The other ones that I think you'd probably really enjoy are the ophthalmotilapia. I'll show you those in a minute. Very expensive. And then the Burchardi, which are very common. They tend to breed like rabbits, but also they have really cool fin patterns, which I think are pretty awesome. So here, that's a feather fin. The feather fins, like I said, these guys, if you see them in a pet store, or the Cyprichromis, you could easily spend 50, 60, 70, 80 bucks each on those fish. Where like the shell dwellers, they might be like 10, 15 bucks. The rock dwellers, maybe around $10, $12 a piece, at least around here. The numbers I'm sharing with you are numbers that are from retail around here. But when you're looking at these feather fins, I mean, big dollars, really big dollars. And so what a lot of people do, this was Jason's fish room, not mine, another guy named Jason from our club. These guys were absolutely stunning. And the colors on them are really, really nice. So again, if you're thinking about a Lake Tanganyika setup, the feather fins and the open water swimmers like the Cyprichromis will offer you a lot of really rich color. And the fins are cool. So again, that's why they call them the feather fins, because especially the males, they get these really long fins. These are the Furcifer roseba. I'm going to share with you a very sad story. I had a group of these because I saw them in Jason's fish room. I'm like, I need that in my life. I have to have these fish. So I bought a group. They were relatively small. I stuck them in a 33 long. It was covered. It had lids. And somehow those fish, you think like the killifish are good jumpers? I don't know what these guys were on, but they would find a little hole and be like, oh, there's another one on the ground. And I bought them from the rare fish auction. I didn't spend 80 bucks a piece, but they weren't cheap. And slowly, one by one, I'm like, there's another one. And then eventually I just had a couple females that I threw in my 125. But these are really, really pretty. Size-wise, they vary. Somewhere around 4 or 5 inches for some of the smaller ones. Some of the larger ones, it's not unheard of for them to get around 7 inches or so. But again, it's the color. That's what's really awesome about these guys. The Burchardi is what you're seeing here. These are the ones I told you. I have them in a 37-gallon, and I really like them. But they breed like obsessively. Like they're like, my only goal in life is to make as many babies as I can. And what they do is even more strange. So a lot of times when you're breeding fish, the parents are responsible for protecting the fry. With the Burchardi, and this is the 37, again, it was just set up for breeding, it's not a beautiful tank, the juveniles will actually protect the younger fry. So the whole colony gets together and protects fry, so you have to be careful. If you add these fish to a larger tank with other Lake Tanganyikans, sometimes they can overrun a tank. So sometimes it's best just to be like, all right, you know what, I might have a couple females or a couple males in a larger tank. These fish would do best in at least like a 40 breeder or a 4-foot tank. But again, the feather fins, these are fish, just generally speaking, that you'd probably want a 4-foot tank. Even a 33 long or a 55-gallon for a lot of them works pretty well. Now, I'm showing you this again because there's another fish in here that's really awesome. The small predatory fish from Lake Tanganyika have the most insane shape to them. So while a lot of these fish have cool colors, that guy right there, that is a compressiceps. And so he just looks so menacing. They are predatory. They're very, very, very skinny fish. They're wide body, but they're skinny. And the reason for that is they will actually eat fry and other fish, but the way they do it is they sneak in between rocks and they hide there and they grab them. So here you're seeing some more. These are I think those were those were compressiceps as well. And they're if you want to add a different shape, visual interest, this is the way to go. In our 125, I've got a group of these. They're called inkfin calvus. I'll show you those in a few minutes. There you go, inkfin calvus. And they're not, I don't find them to be very aggressive. They're not really all that aggressive with one another. They're not really aggressive towards other fish. And what's really weird about them is their scales. So their scales are actually extremely sharp. And so if another fish tries to bite on them, they'll tear their mouth up. And so they learn very quickly, hey, this fish might make me angry, but biting it is a really bad thing to do, because essentially what they're doing is they're biting little razor blades all along the side of them. So they are predatory. So if you're going to keep them and you want to breed fish in your Lake Tanganyika tank, whether it's shell dwellers, rock dwellers, you just want to see some fry, you're not. So these guys will make sure that you see absolutely no fry. So this might be a good option if you want to keep the brachardi, and then you want to do compressiceps. Those are the larger ones, so those will get.
All right, folks, 1 o'clock on the main stage. Sanjay giving his talk. Sure to get back there and check it out. It's a big draw for Sanjay. And then at 1:30, the freshwater skate off on the contest stage. All kinds of things to see. Make sure you get over to see the flower horn contest, the shrimp contest, kids corner, the fluval aquascaping live contest, aqua life booth where they give escaping demos. You name it, it's here to see. Lizards, fish, dogs. I don't know. Look around.
Dogs.
This is something we haven't seen yet.
Dogs? Dogs? We got dogs? Who let the dogs out? Okay. So anyway, the compressiceps, they're the larger ones. They're going to get to be around 5 or 6 inches. Again, real menacing looking. The calvus, smaller, usually around 3 inches or so. And the joke, if you keep either one of these fish, is if you see them, I mean, if you can even just see them, they're like, hey man, how long have you had those? Oh, 25 years. They're one of the slowest growing fish you will ever see, at least in terms of cichlids. So these guys are really cool. For the calvus, a 20-gallon is fine. If you want to do the compressiceps, a 4-foot tank would be better. Now, last one, and that's the large predatory fish. Again, this is my classification system, not the scientific classification system. And by the way, I'll show you some other video here in a second. This is not anywhere close to exhaustive. For those who've kept Lake Tanganyika fish, you know there are lots of other ones that I have left out. But again, we'd be here all night if I did that. Check this tank out. So this is the example. I think the main example, the one I want to talk about, those are frontosa. Anybody heard of frontosa? Anybody ever kept them? Also, a lot of people. These fish are majestic. I think that's the only way I can explain them. For Lake Tanganyika fish, they get huge, right? The fish that you're looking at here, this was from Ohio Fish Rescue. When I went there, I filmed this tank. I just sat there for like a half hour looking at these fish. The tank itself, I think, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was around 10 or 12 feet long and probably 3 or 4 feet tall and maybe at least 4 feet wide. So this was a massive tank. So sometimes it's really hard to see scale, because you're looking at these fish like, oh, they look small. They were not small. They were huge. They were every bit of it. The larger ones, well over 12 inches. So the wonderful thing about these fish is if you're looking for something that's large, you like large fish, but these do not get terribly aggressive. So when you see them in Big Rich's fish tank, they're not fighting with one another. They're not tearing each other apart. They're not locking lips. Look at them. That's what they do. They're not very active either. So if you want a tank that's like really relaxing, you don't want like guppies. Guppies are like pow, 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 pow. These guys, like, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to look pretty. That's my job. Thank you. Thank you very much. So keep them in a group. Now, downside is these guys, large tank. Again, minimum. If you're going to keep a group, really either like a 210, 220 is a bare minimum. I would probably do an 8 or 10 foot tank. If I were doing them, I would want to do a setup similar to what you're seeing here. And most of your other Lake Tanganyika fish, good luck. They're going to get eaten. The mouth on these guys are huge. So all of your cyprichromis, your shell dwellers, your rock dwellers, they're just food. That's just food for them. So keep that in mind if you ever want to keep them. It's best to keep by themselves. You could keep them with like the Synodontis catfish. That's pretty cool. The larger feather fins that get to be 6 or 7 inches, those would be fine. But you're kind of limited there in terms of what you're going to keep. So I wanted to show you a couple other pictures here. These are the shell dwellers. These are the multis. So they're just chilling out. Those are the rock dwellers. That's the ornatus. And then we've got, again, that's my favorite. If you ever find those are the ones you want to go with. Cyprichromis, probably one of my favorite open water fish, just because of the color. They're easy to breed. They're not aggressive. I've had, at times in that 40 breeder, 150 fish in there and not a single torn fin. These are jumbo cyprichromis, in case you like your cyprichromis a little larger. Like, no, those are too small. I want the big ones. So Those are the jumbos. And what's cool about them is they have a yellow face. So they get this nice yellow face, they get the nice yellow fins, but they do get like at least another inch and a half. This is that 33 long. The orange ones are all the Lelupai. Those are not Burchardi. Those are a different fish. They're Burchardi-like. I think they were a Cygnus, and quite frankly, I made a big mistake when I bought those because I don't know what I was. They're really pretty when they're young, and then they grow up and they're just like, okay, we're silver. We're not as pretty as the Burchardi, but we're every bit as assertive. So again, that's all flagstone floating up at the top. You've got some hornwort. You've got jungle bell at the top. These are the gold ocellatus and a planted 125. This one here, there's probably fry or eggs in that shell, so they're not going to go very far. These are ones I hadn't shown you. So there are other types. The bifronatus, that's the one at the top. They're just kind of hanging out there. The one down there with the vertical stripes, that's the Congoensis. There's lots of almost like goby-like Lake Tanganyikans, and I didn't get a chance to really talk about those because, again, there's just so many different kinds. But if you look at like the goby-like Lake Tanganyikans or even some of the more rare rock dwellers, they can be really cool. That's a female. So that's a female Cyprichromis leptosoma. Here's our inkfin again. Lots of varieties of the Calvus. So you've got lots of different colors. Same with the Compressiceps. Again, really menacing, really mean looking, but they're not all that aggressive. That was the Meleagris, probably, like I said, the meanest of the shell dwellers. He's actually got his head down because he doesn't like the Calvus being close to him, but he's not stupid enough to bite him anymore because he's figured that situation out. So that was a fish of Lake Tanganyika, at least some of them. So questions? Way back there. Come on up, because I won't be able to hear you from all the way back there. You'll have to scream really loud, and then your voice will hurt. You want to know what I did today while he's coming up? Check this out. You guys are going to be jealous. I got hand warmers, 2 of them. About halfway through this presentation, full disclosure, I was wondering why my butt was getting so warm. I'm like, is there something wrong with me? Like, what's going on? It was these. So I get warm hands, and so go ahead.
How do I get rid of my Malaysian trumpet snails?
That's a great question. How do you get rid of Malaysian trumpet snails? He's got millions. Millions? And they won't stop. They don't usually stop. Okay, so you're probably not going to like this answer. I don't mind them because usually for my Malaysian trumpet snails, they burrow when the lights are on. And then when the lights come, when you first turn them on, they're everywhere. So the lights go out, they come out, they clean all the algae, they're doing all the things, and then they just burrow again. So I don't really worry about them, but if they're getting out of control, sometimes the assassin snails will work. I know like most of my African cichlids eat them because if there are not Malaysian trumpet snails in one of my tanks, it's because there's something in there eating them, because I don't make any effort to make sure that duckweed or snails are being isolated in certain tanks. So a lot of the African cichlids eat them. The other one that you could try is the dwarf chain loach if you're looking for something small. Now you ever had dwarf chain loaches? They're really small, but they're also kind of jerks too, right? But they will sometimes do something. So what size tank? So 29? Yeah, 29. You could try the assassin snails, see if they put it. But if you're going to use assassin snails, the mistake a lot of people make is they'll just throw like 1 or 2 in the tank and be like, yeah, go kill the 1,000 Malaysian trumpet snails. And it's like, no, you're going to need, you start with 10 or 12, but also understand sometimes you're exchanging one type of snail for another, because they will also start to go crazy. And they'll kill all the other snails, but they burrow too, but they're also better looking. So fish, some cichlids, dwarf chain loaches, the tiger loach will sometimes nibble on them. For bigger fish like silver dollars, tinfoil barbs, bala sharks, they definitely take care of them, but that's not appropriate for a 29. So, yeah.
Why do zebra Daniel's backs get so crooked?
Why do zebra Daniel backs get so? That's actually a great question. One of it's just breeding. For the most part, they are just mass producing these things. A lot of them are used for research. They're considered like an entry level fish, so they don't sell for a lot. So quite frankly, I don't think there's a whole lot of care going on in terms of making sure that they're genetically sound, because they're just breeding these things by the tens of thousands, maybe millions, and just shipping them out. And yeah, every once in a while. And especially there are certain fish that I think are more prone to genetic abnormalities. Daniels are one. Sometimes guppies. It just seems like some of you go and you get guppies from a store, like, why can't I keep these things alive? You go to a breeder and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they're all better now. So guppies, bettas, I think at this point you have to really be careful because now you're getting a lot of tumors and bent spines and all kinds of horrible things. So it's genetics. They don't care as much about it, I don't think.
That's all I got.
Okay, any other questions? Yes? That's a great question. So as it pertains to the shell dwellers, can you keep multiple shell dwellers together? The answer is I have. So in the 125, I've had the gold ocellatus, the meleagris, and Neolamprologus brevis. I didn't see any hybridization. I would be very careful though. I think I got lucky on that because the gold ocellatus and the brevis, even the meleagris, they do have a similar body style, and it's more likely that they're going to see some hybridization the more similar they are. I would never keep the simulus and multis together because they will definitely hybridize. So generally speaking, I try not to. I just like to have one type, but could you keep multiples together? Yeah, but just be really careful if you start seeing fry that you know what they are. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes? So for the greens, like the Tropheus and stuff, you're talking spirulina. So the Repashy, the brand is actually, it's called Morning Wood. That's the actual what they call it. That's got a lot of fiber in it and stuff. The kelp wafers from Northfin, I did a video on algae wafers and stuff, and a lot of times you get those algae wafers, all it is just green fish food. Look at the actual ingredients, you're like, well, this is pretty much the same ingredient profile as the other fish food I'm using, it's just green. So kelp wafers can definitely be used. And of course, people will use vegetables like cucumbers and stuff depending on the fish. Yeah. Anything else? All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the time. Thank you.